the driving issue, from what I read, has been the abortion issue. And it was over the summer that Iowa's 6-week ban on abortion went into effect after all the court challenges were taken care of. So that's the decision being made, the law going into force, and then people living with it for a while, and it being a strong, sort of compelling thing from Iowa's in the congressional districts. Iowa right now, all 4 congressional districts are held by Republicans. So
Yeah.
to me, it seems like to a certain extent there's something organic going on because the presidential candidates certainly aren't spending any money or time here.
Our opening clip was everyone's favorite pollster, Jay Ann Selzer, explaining that what we're witnessing today in America and bucking the historical trends of recent elections is a women's revolt. In the 2022 midterms, women won Democrats the Senate, and Republicans were only able to cling to a tiny majority in the House thanks to women, even though historically, the midterms are a backlash against the party that holds the White House. In 2023, women flipped the House in Virginia and held on to the Senate, electing the first trans woman, Danica Roem, to the state Senate in Virginia. Their grassroots power denied posh Trump Glenn Youngkin the majority he needed to push through his 15-week abortion ban. In 2024, women continue to dominate the early voting numbers, driven, as Jay Ann Selzer points out, by the medieval Christian nationalist abortion ban by men who simply do not understand nor care how a woman's body works. Abortion is healthcare, full stop. My second pregnancy was a high-risk pregnancy, and I was told very matter-of-factly by my doctor that if I should start bleeding uncontrollably, that they would perform an emergency abortion to save my life. My husband agreed with no questions asked. It was a no-brainer. Of course, because that's healthcare. Abortion is healthcare. Could you imagine if I was in Texas today or Georgia today, where women are dying, being killed by Russian-backed Republicans? I would leave my husband and my firstborn daughter in this world without me. I have dependents. I have people who need me. And so do the women who are being killed by the GOP abortion bans. Women across the political spectrum are furious. And the polls that the mainstream media has been snorting like cocaine did not account for that because, for one thing, they're being flooded by dirty Republican polls. The polls are a psyops meant to demoralize us and boost confidence in the Trump campaign so that Trump and his family can rake in money to enrich themselves, since we know that money is not being invested in a ground operation of canvassers in swing states, which is non-existent for the Trump campaign. The media didn't bother to point out that problem with the polls, taking them at face value, overlooking women once again in our deeply, casually misogynistic society where the majority of newsrooms continue to be filled with white men. And those white men, a study that I'll link to in the show notes explains, mostly only talk to each other on social media, mostly only amplify each other. That's partly why these polls historically suck election after election. The same misogyny that drove James Comey to attack Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election while remaining silent on Russia's attack on our democracy to steal that election for Trump. Electing the first woman president does not solve misogyny in this country, just like electing the first Black president did not solve racism. We have to remain vigilant and united in our grassroots communities to protect ourselves and our democracy from the white rage backlash that's coming. But if we win this week, and I've been saying all year, I believe we will win, there's more of us than there are of them. Never lose sight of the fact that there are countless people like you who refuse to let these Nazis destroy the progress that our mothers and our grandmothers fought for. Hold that in your heart that you are not alone. you have the majority of people on your side. And many of our Gaslit Nation listeners are on the front lines of planting seeds of change, of turning their anger into hope. We're up against femicide in this country. That is what you're going to see in this vote outcome. Republicans want to normalize killing women like they've normalized mass shootings. As the writer Liz Lenz points out, writing on Twitter, it's wild to see people describe women voting for abortion access as single issue voters. Like, yeah, my guys, I'm a single issue voter, and that issue is my life. Liz Lenz wrote an amazing book on surviving the women-hating cult of evangelicals. It's called Godland. Check it out. Unfortunately, Liz and I are outnumbered in the media by clueless white men who have been buying into the GOP-driven dirty polar coaster all year, while once again ignoring the humanity of women. To illustrate what we're up against, I want to share this tweet written today, Election Day, by Jeff Stein, the White House economics reporter for the Washington Post, who is actually one of the better ones. I'll read it now. Kind of a dumb post, but living through the last 10 years has left me awed by the impossibility of even trying to discern what caused major events in history. I covered it as a reporter, and yet the origins of Trump's rise in 2016 still seem extremely difficult to precisely identify and subject to massive legitimate debate among credible contemporaries. He means white men. If Harris wins tomorrow, you could similarly likely convince me it was primarily due to a huge range of explanations that are in tension, if not outright contradictory. But then historians look back 2,000 years to try to explain why the Roman Republic collapsed. How? It seems literally impossible to do with any degree of confidence. All right, so I was having my morning coffee and I saw Jeff Stein put that out there. And right away I thought, I am morally obligated to respond. So I rolled up my sleeves, giving him a concise summary of every Gaslit Nation episode ever. Here is what I wrote. The Reagan Revolution ignited a culture of greed is good, alongside the rise of Christian nationalism. Democrats, for their part, embraced this shift, allowing unions to weaken and newsrooms to erode, all in the name of boosting corporate profits. As a result, Trump and Manafort's brand of corruption thrived in plain sight. Throughout American history, progress for Black people has been met with violent white rage. And Trump's birtherism was the inevitable response to the first Black president. Meanwhile, Russia's support for Trump wasn't just about sowing chaos in US politics. It was part of a broader geopolitical strategy to lift sanctions and advance their long-standing imperial ambitions, which have been unfolding since Russia invaded Georgia. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is merely the latest chapter of rising Russian imperialism. All of this is compounded by the deep structural misogyny and racism in America, a nation built on genocide that persists to this day with the prison industrial complex and the epidemic of violence against Native American women. These forces are not isolated, they're interconnected, fueling each other in a dangerous cycle. The gasoline on that fire is unchecked social media as well as Silicon Valley greed. What's left of newsrooms are populated by white men who aren't sensitive to most of these issues since they're blinded by their own privilege. And there you have it, America. That is why Gaslit Nation exists. And now, here's a clip of John Jackson, a former Republican and American veteran currently in Kiev, Ukraine, helping Ukraine resist Russian fascism, with a special message to voters on Election Day.
Behind me, there are rows and rows of barbed wire, and they are protecting the Ukrainian government, a liberal European democracy. And indeed, this cherished political system, which elevates the person over the state, is under attack across the world, including in America itself. Right now, there are mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, lifelong friends, fighting and dying for their right to self-determination in this bravest of nations. They're giving their last measure of devotion for what you will do today. And when you exercise this right, I ask that you make the only decision consistent with our values. I ask that you think of the world we will leave our children. I ask that you think about what we teach them. A vote for Trump teaches our children that lying is okay, that might is right, that violence is the answer, and that you should insult the underprivileged rather than help them. This is not the world that the veterans of the Civil War, of World War II, or of the Civil Rights Movement in America fought to preserve. We must instead choose the path of love, righteousness, and freedom for all people, regardless of national boundaries. This is a vote for the future of mankind. You know, it's been a hard struggle, but I'm very proud of those who have supported Kamala Harris of all political stripes. I ask that you consider my words in making your critical decision today. God bless America. God bless Ukraine. God bless all of you. And as the sun sets on this day, we think and believe in a brighter tomorrow. Love to all of you.
As Gaslit Nation has been documenting all year, Russia is trying to get Trump back in the White House to complete its Russian state capture, just like what they've done to the country of Georgia, which continues its protests. Thousands of people are in the street trying to overturn a deeply fraudulent election. Russian terrorism is ramping up here in the States. Russia got caught trying to 9/11 the US, meaning Russia was trying to turn US-bound cargo planes into weapons of mass destruction. Fires were reported linked to Russian test runs to target cargo flights headed to the US. I will link to this in the show notes. This is Russian terrorism through and through. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the type of terror that Russia unleashes on Ukraine every day. And then you have the intelligence community warning again and again that the number one terrorist threat to the US election continues to be Russia. And Russia is aligned with white domestic terrorists here in the US. They see themselves as part of this larger accelerationist struggle against the quote woke left. I will read from this IC statement. Since our statement on Friday, the IC has been observing foreign adversaries, particularly Russia, conducting additional influence operations intended to undermine public confidence in the integrity of U.S. elections and stoke divisions among Americans. The IC expects these activities will intensify through Election Day and in the coming weeks, and that foreign influence narratives will focus on swing states. Russia is the most active threat. Influence actors linked to Russia in particular are manufacturing videos and creating fake articles to undermine the legitimacy of the election, instill fear in voters regarding the election process, and suggest Americans are using violence against each other due to political preferences, judging from information available to the IC. And it was just recently reported that a major account on Twitter was paid $100 just for posting, again, a video by Russia targeting Haitian immigrants in America, trying to hijack our election from Trump. This is the chaos they're trying to seed, and so get ready for an eventful couple weeks ahead, no matter who should win. The DOJ has sent federal election monitors to dozens of districts across the country. Florida, Missouri, and Texas refuse to let them inside the polling stations. Florida, Missouri, and Texas being the states on the list with some of the largest number of districts that need federal monitors. So the fact that these governors, who are proudly MAGA, are refusing to let the federal election monitors inside the polling stations, I would read that very much as a confession of trying to steal those elections. And these are three states, Florida, Missouri, and Texas, that are going to determine which party controls the Senate. The Senate, which oversees our judiciary, which has been massively packed by Federalist Society Leonard Leo, who has a $1.6 billion war chest to hijack our democracy. We're going to do a big episode on that with a focus on Opus Dei in the weeks ahead. All of this is to say that as euphoric as many of us are feeling, because we see the energy in the early vote, we see women especially dominating these early vote numbers. We see the long lines, which are a form of voter suppression, not just enthusiasm. We see these packed Kamala Harris rallies. I know it's not safe to celebrate early, especially the trauma we all went through in 2016. But the numbers, the enthusiasm, all the reports we're getting on the ground, the hugely well-organized grassroots machine that the Kamala Harris campaign and Black Voters Matter and Working Families Party and States Project and Sister District and all of these groups have unleashed in these critical months. The investment is paying off. The enthusiasm is real. These numbers are real. As election night takes off, there's going to be initially a red mirage as a lot of these so-called red states come back with their numbers earlier in the night, faster. And so give it time for the results to come out. But it's okay to feel cautiously optimistic. You're getting the white male pundits of mainstream media saying, you know what? It looks like Kamala Harris actually might win. Like they're finally coming out and saying it. From putting us through a year of hell, first bashing Biden, then saying some white guy had to replace him, trying to bypass Kamala Harris, even though she's the vice president. And then after she became the party nominee, with that huge response of all of those Zoom calls, nerds for Kamala Harris, people that love crochet for Kamala Harris, all of those groups that sprouted up. The white male pundits still couldn't bring themselves to say, like, she might win. Trump was the front runner. It was Trump's election, to the point where Warren Buffett couldn't bring himself to endorse a candidate in this race. But women are showing up in these record numbers. It turns out women have humanity. It turns out women matter. And it's not reflected in the polling. It's not reflected in the media because of the deep misogyny in this country. And we've only had the right to vote in this country for 100 years, which is pretty much a lifetime. So we're at the very start of transforming this country and fighting for progress in order to normalize that I'm a human being, that trans women are human beings, that trans men are human beings, that gay marriages are families. We're at the very start of beating back these Neanderthals that are trying to drag us back. We made around 30,000 phone calls for the Senate races for Montana and Nebraska at the Gaslit Nation and an indivisible phone bank party last night on election eve. That's a massive amount of phone calls to get out the vote and to help people make a plan to vote on election day. We left it all out on the field this election season. But we're up against actual terrorism. There was a gang of around 70 white domestic terrorists that were just busted in Los Angeles by the feds. And in Tennessee, a 24-year-old white nationalist who prays to the Norse god Odin was arrested for trying to send a drone rigged with explosives to blow up a power station in Nashville. I will read now from the Associated Press. He allegedly told undercover law enforcement officials that he was affiliated with several white nationalist and extremist groups, including the National Alliance, which calls for eradicating the Jewish people and other races. Such extremist groups increasingly have viewed attacking the United States power grid as a means of disrupting the country. Where did they learn that? That is what Russia does against Ukraine. Again, it's all connected. Like there's an overlap of the American far right and the Russian far right that's been building for at least the last 10 years. And I'll link to that in the show notes. This time around, we did everything that needed to be done. Back on this show in 2022, I kept saying these midterms are going to determine who wins the 2024 election. We have to win in all of these key battleground states and ensure that we elect Democrats, people that care about democracy, to these important state offices, because they're going to be overseeing the election in 2024. And that is exactly what we did. We did the work in 2022 so we can have more security in 2024. We defeated the big lie candidates in the big key state races in the midterms. And now we've got adults in the room monitoring our elections and keeping us safe. And we've been doing this work election cycle after election cycle. That is where my optimism comes from on this show. It's the data. It's being part of the grassroots. It's witnessing the grassroots in action. It's following these historical election upsets. It's wonderful to see. And I want to close out this segment on election integrity and the threats to our election, which we will overcome, with a clip of Philadelphia's district attorney, Larry Krasner, known as the progressive prosecutor, who was elected back in 2017 thanks to grassroots power. This clip is a urgent reminder that our democracy, it all comes down to local state races.
I want people to be reassured that when they get up tomorrow to go vote, if they have not voted already, that everybody in this city is working and has been working for months to make sure that there will be nothing tough about that experience and nothing to fear in that experience. But I also want to be clear, anybody who thinks it's time to play militia, F around and find out. Anybody who thinks it's time to insult, to deride, to mistreat, to threaten people, F around and find out. We do have the cuffs, we do have the jail cells, we do have the Philly juries, and we have the state prisons. So if you're going to try to turn an election into some form of coercion, if you're going to try to bully people, bully votes or voters, you're going to try to erase votes, you're going to try any of that nonsense, we're not playing. F around and find out.
All across the country, state officials are on high alert. So just remember that. We're not alone. We have a Democrat in the White House this time around. In 2020, we had to extract Trump from the White House. Okay, so things are different this time around. Someone has clearly woken up Merrick Garland. The DOJ is posting messages saying, if you're harassed trying to vote, if somebody tries to intimidate you, call 911. Call 911. And so I think this election, and I know what you're probably thinking, well, what about Trump's plan with MAGA Mike Johnson? Mike Johnson was the legal architect of the big lie. He was the one that came up with that scheme of trying to force these fake state electors and so on. We right now have 172 election deniers in the House. But it looks like Democrats are going to win a slim majority of the House. And that new House is going to be sworn in before the presidential election results are certified. So even that switchover is going to create enough imbalance. Republicans are going to lose some seats and Democrats are hopefully going to have a majority. Mike Johnson, there's not much he can do at that point. Obviously, if it comes down to one state in the Electoral College, the Republicans will get it to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court will destroy our democracy, just like they did in 2000 in the big Florida case, which ushered in George W. Bush, who then ushered in the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse with the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq and crashing the global economy and giving rise to ISIS and so on. So, but right now it's looking like a very strong electoral college map for Kamala Harris. We will discuss how things are going in an episode of Gaslit Nation recorded this coming Friday with my dear friend Terrell Starr of the Black Diplomats podcast and Substack. Whatever should happen in the weeks ahead, our community is here. We're having every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern political salons over Zoom, where we come together, we help each other through these times that we're witnessing, living in, and we record those salons and put them up on our Patreon page for our community there. And so you're not alone in this. You're not alone in this. We have each other. So if we should win, our work then becomes to fight for the desperately needed reforms so we don't have to go through another existential crisis election like this again. If we do not reform these outdated systems built by slave owners like the Electoral College, we're going to have elections like this every cycle. Because even when Trump is dead, he's gone, you're left with JD Vance, you're left with Peter Thiel. And it's going to be like this election cycle. A few undecided voters in some key swing districts in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, are going to determine global security for Europe and the whole world. It cannot come down to this every election cycle. Should Kamala Harris get in, what we're all morally obligated to do together is to then normalize the grassroots campaign to reform the Electoral College. Jamie Raskin in the House already has legislation for this. We did a whole episode on reforming Electoral College. I'll link to it in the show notes. We are within reach of doing that. We just need a few more states to sign on to the National Vote Compact. Democrats need to normalize this as core to their platform, just like they religiously protect Obamacare. It needs to have that level of fervor behind it by the Democratic Party establishment. Because without reforming the Electoral College, we're stuck fighting for our lives with this emotional exhaustion every single election. Reforming the Electoral College is an issue that will unite Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Because by reforming the Electoral College, you're uniting to stand up against extremism. Because that's what the Electoral College does. It empowers the extremists, because you only have to win a few key states. And then on top of that, we need to declare all out war on gerrymandering. The United States is alone in industrialized democratic nations in having extreme gerrymandering. The United Nations released a report on it. It's a crisis that further inflames the extremist problem, the extremist problem that we have here in the United States, holding our democracy hostage. So those are the two things we desperately need to reform: the Electoral College and the gerrymandering. The Democratic Party establishment needs to embrace those reforms as core to their platform. And yes, judicial reform as well. Sheldon Whitehouse has legislation on that. Elie Mystal has spoken brilliantly on that here on the show. So should Kamala Harris win, be euphoric, celebrate, honor this time, but then roll up your sleeves and join me and get to work. Together, we're going to stand up for trans rights and all LGBTQ rights. We're going to ensure Ukraine wins. We're going to end Republican femicide, demand a ceasefire, protect the environment, and build a freer and fairer world for all of our children. Thank you to everyone who joined us on this wild ride of 2024 here at Gaslit Nation. Again, my dear friend Terrell Starr, the Black Diplomats podcast and Substack, will be joining me this Friday for our big election show. Look out for that later in the week. In the meantime, congratulate yourself for getting through the 2024 election so far. Here's will.i.am's Yes She Can to remind us that the voting we've seen across the country has surpassed even the enthusiasm for Obama in 2008.
Mama, what's wrong with America? Why can't we get along in America? Something's going on in America. People entertained by the predator. We used to be united in America. Now we just divided in America. We all immigrants, different characters, but together, you know, we could break down the barriers. So register and vote for your life. Do it for your daughters and your sons and your wife. If you a woman, then vote for your rights. And don't let them take away your rights. We could be better than we ever been. We're about to have a woman president. Haters gonna say that we can't, but the word American says that I can. And we say, yes, she can. And we say, yes, she can. And we
I am joined by Olga Lautman, one of the world's most in demand, unfortunately, Russian mafia experts. Okay, so Olga, what are you seeing with the Kremlin's reaction to the polls heading in Kamala Harris's direction?
Well, actually, I just released an article on this, and what I'm seeing is extremely dangerous. Let's hope it does not come to fruition, and let's hope all our agencies are on top of it. But basically, what they are planning is way past disinformation operations that we've seen, all the fake videos and all the, paying influencers money. Yesterday, we found out a pro-Trump account was getting paid $100 to tweet out a fake video of Haitians voting illegally in Georgia. Fake, came from the Kremlin. But from there, what I'm worried most is about a post-election, because they detail basically a blueprint for election day violence and for violence after election over the next few months, basically to try to split this country. And there had tried to cause a civil war, because this is what they're salivating over. So it's extremely dark. Hopefully, they're not going to succeed here. We just saw election this weekend in Moldova, and Russia poured so much, including attempting to buy votes and training local Moldovans to carry out basically terrorist attacks. And Moldova still pulled through. Sandu won. Congratulations to Moldovans. And basically, democracy saw another day. And this is what I'm hoping for today. But we still need to be very vigilant with Russia because they are like we are their main project right now.
Maria Butina, who is the Russian spy who was part of the whole Mueller investigation. She was indicted. She served time in prison. She was also a honeypot of the Republican Party who pollinated Kremlin corruption among the GOP. She's back in Russia, where she, of course, got a hero's welcome home, and she's now a darling of Russian state TV. She posted a video today calling for world peace, but the caption of the video that she posted on Twitter said that if you don't like the way this election goes, you always have a home in Russia. So I don't know if that was a signal to the Trump campaign, like, come on over to Russia, exile yourself in Russia like Yanukovych did. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, honestly, Butina is a distraction. She's been tasked with trying to get conservatives to move to Russia, and honestly, good riddance, especially anyone who is pro Kremlin and working against the United States. The bigger point of her video was she basically said that you have to fight for what you want. So she did also kind of hint at violence. But honestly, with her, I would disregard. I mean, she's a washed up Duma member now and looks actually like shit since she was floating around here and honeypotting people and carrying out her operations. So that is just more noise from them.
And the incentive of luring American conservatives to move over to Russia, what advantage does that have for Russia's operation?
They want more propagandists because the more Americans and actually Westerners who come to Russia get paid to spread Russian propaganda, the happier Russia is. And in a lot of cases, these people basically all you can do is buy them with underage girls. So it doesn't even cost that much. So they just want people to spread more propaganda. I mean, it just shows you that Russia is a collapsing state because they're spending so much time and trying to prove otherwise and show how great it is to move to Russia. I mean, frankly, no one wants to move to Russia. And the few that do, we've seen a handful of people move, but I don't predict a mass exodus to go live in Russian hell.
You and I started this hell year of 2024 recording an episode in January where we both were talking about how, you know what, we're going to live our best lives while fighting fascism. We both stocked up on makeup over the holidays. We're the glam squad that's going to defeat Putin. Like, we were starting this year off with this larger trend of being the joyful warriors. We're sharing this message of like Putin's days are numbered. We're going to win this election. We don't know how, but we're going to win. And it's been a roller coaster of a year ever since. How are you feeling now?
The analytical part of me feels confident because since 2020, I mean, first of all, Trump couldn't hold on to power in 2020. Since then, he has done so many egregious things to different communities, to women, the Roe versus Wade being found liable for a rape in New York. And I mean, it's just constantly, every time he opens his mouth, he alienates another group of people. I mean, analytically speaking, I feel that Harris will win. Also, the past few days, I mean, the noise coming out from far right influencers, they sound like banshees. They're screaming and spreading disinformation, election fraud and theft disinformation, and at the same time claiming how wonderful they're doing and look at the polls and we're winning this and whatnot. They're polluting the information space so much, and their tactics are identical to how Russia operates. And with Russia, the more noise that is made, the more that means that they're losing, because when Russia is winning, they're quiet. And in this case, just the amount of noise coming out from the far right, I feel that we're heading in the right way. On top of everything else, like I said, that Trump has alienated so many people. And I mean, the whole Republican Party has fell in line, and they're basically against women, against you disagree with them, and you're alienated and the enemy of the people. Stalin's famous quote. So I think people are realizing that democracy is important, women's rights are important, and we've seen the enthusiasm around Harris. While with Trump, I mean, you see his rallies are dwindling down. It looks like a dying dinosaur. And I hope to God that we finally sweep him away today, because I am confident in 28 he's finished. He's not coming back. And if this gets swept away, maybe we can finally start pushing MAGA out. They'll lose influence, and eventually somewhat of a normal Republican Party will emerge.
I'm doubtful of that, especially because of Peter Thiel and JD Vance and all the money that Elon Musk, these leopards can't change their spots.
They're not going to change their spots, but they're also going to be alienated, because the mega movement was counting on JD Vance being the next Trump. And I mean, the guy has as much charisma as watching paint dry on a wall, and like Trump has like that perfect storm of features that propelled him and made him a good weapon for the far right and propelled him to the top. Whereas others, they scream or they say obnoxious things, but it really doesn't captivate the audience. Will the far right disappear? Never. We still have to continue working hard, but I think that for a bit they will be sidelined. And I don't think the more moderate Republicans in the Republican Party are going to want to go for a fourth loss. I mean, really, how many times can you get kicked in the head? So I do think it will trend that way. Elon Musk at this point is a joke. He's turned into really a Russian troll who just sits and tweets bullshit out. With all his money, you would think that he'd have more influence, but he really isn't. I mean, everyone caught on to his game fairly early on, particularly Ukrainians, when we were being silenced after Russia's full-scale invasion. And we right away saw that he was silencing anyone covering Ukraine and Russia's horrific war crimes and genocide, and at the same time propping up Russian disinformation accounts. Then we Ukrainians were screaming when he was disabling Starlink in very advantageous points to help Russia get ahead, or to try to stop Ukraine from pushing Russia back. Russian drones have Starlink in them and are falling on top of Ukrainian cities. With that said, like, everyone has caught on with Elon. In America, people very quickly saw this. Peter Thiel is an interesting one that deserves a whole episode on its own. But I do think for the time being that will be a drop more calmer if Harris wins today. Even after the January 6th insurrection that Trump planned and executed along with his thugs, you saw that once Biden got into office, things were much more calm in 21 and 22 versus when Trump reemerged back to center state. So I'm hopeful that America needs to make the right choice. And right now it feels like we're watching a meteor coming at us and praying that it will miss.
And Elon Musk got dragged into court by Philadelphia's district attorney, Larry Krasner, for blatantly breaking election laws by essentially bribing with his $1 million scheme giveaway. And he's fighting that case by essentially claiming fraud. He was lying. It wasn't really a sweepstakes. And so he's sort of like, his defense in court is that I wasn't breaking the law because I was breaking the law. Like, it's like the guy is just has so much money that it's rotted his brain.
And he won. I mean, he won that case temporarily yesterday, which is absurd. But again, this is why we need to stay vigilant. If Harris wins, that doesn't mean we, pack up our tents and go away and say, okay, democracy saved, and that's it. We still have to continue dealing with these people, making sure they're all held accountable. I mean, right now, Harris needs to win tonight so I can finally put Trump into the dustbins of hellish history. But then right back to Russia, because Russia needs to be defeated. And now Elon is on top of my list, and I really am going to continue pushing to make sure that his clearance gets pulled and that he doesn't have government contracts, because why are we, the taxpayers, paying for him to have secret calls with Putin, to sabotage our allies and help assist Russia in committing a genocide? Why are we paying? And then this egregious attack on America that he's buying voters. Russia's this pro-Kremlin oligarch in Moldova fled Russia after basically robbing Moldova. He's sitting in Russia, and one of the big schemes of buying votes in the election was coming from the Kremlin through him. And then they were basically shipping suitcases of money of arriving passengers to distribute the money out to voters to have them vote a certain way. I mean, this is the same thing here. The difference between him sitting in Russia or Elon paying for votes here. So we can't allow this, and we need to continue. And right now, the only objective is that Harris wins tonight. After that, we need to continue making sure that our agencies are acting in the best interest of Americans, of national security, protecting voters, and not allowing these things. And another bonus, if Harris wins, we potentially might have 2 Supreme Court justices retiring soon. I mean, this gives her the possibility to balance out the court again by appointing normal justices and not ones that are being paid off. There's a lot at stake, and we need to make sure today we win, and then going forward, we need to continue working on our democratic project.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up at the Truth Teller level or higher on Patreon. Gaslit Nation hosts Come As You Are political salons every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Can't make it live? Recordings are available to our community on Patreon. Our salons are your space to vent, ask questions, and connect with other listeners who also really hate Nazis. To help Ukraine with urgently needed humanitarian aid, join me in donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. To help refugees in conflict zones, donate to Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Andrea Chalupa. Our editing wizard is Nicholas Torres, and our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smythe of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Ice Bear is Defiant, Sydney Davies, Work for Better, Prep for Trouble, Lily Wachowski, John Schoenthaler, Larry Gasson, D. Scott, Ann Bertino, David East, Joseph Mara Jr., Sean Berg, Kristen Custer, Kevin Gannon, Sandra Collins, Katie Masuris, James D. Leonard, Leo Chalupa, Carol Golstad, Marcus J. Trent, Joe Darcy, Ann Marshall, D.L. Singfield, Nicole Spear, Abby Road, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Mark, Sarah Gray, Diana Gallagher, Leah Campbell, Abby Zavos, Tanya Chalupa. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.